Hello, welcome to our fucking podcast. Yeah.
Name that. We don't want to figure it out.
Yeah.
I'm Josh.
I'm Maverick.
We're talking about living as a skeptic.
Yeah, this is
Yes. So we're gonna start out with a little bit of history. I'm gonna focus on Hume and Descartes, just brief stuff, and then Maverick will pick it up there.
Yep.
So Hume brought some pretty basic but pretty interesting ideas to the world of skepticism. He initially started with few acknowledgments that whenever it comes to something external from us, there's always going to be some deep contradictions with it. If I remembered his examples, I'd pull them up. But he recognized this, and he took solace in the fact that he thought anything internal would not have contradictions and that it would be accessible to us. Later, he went back on that opinion. He was like, no, everything internal also has contradictions inherent to it. And his basic conclusion ended up being, this kind of sucks, but there's nothing we can really do about it because these contradictions will always be there. So we just move forward, assuming skepticism isn't valid because that's more productive. Moving on to Descartes. Descartes, obviously, he was very religious, and he wrestled with skepticism. He wrote the Meditations. He, in his opinion, dealt with skepticism by finding quote-unquote basic beliefs that we could argue whether or not those are basic beliefs. That's an interesting question that we could go on about, but the way he came about applying that to real life and trying to get rid of skepticism wasn't really efficient at all for his weird argumentation for God and stuff like that.
Yeah. It's worth noting with Descartes too, he got out of his skepticism using it. He was like, well, I can be certain of one thing, and the one thing that I can start everything at is I know that I'm doubting. And that's an approach that other philosophers we're going to talk about are not willing to take. But when we're talking about his failed project, though, we're talking about him immediately making the conclusion of God to get out of evil demon doubt. It's just like, the hell are you doing? So yeah, there's that. Let's talk about Kant real quick. Kant introduces this. We're not going to talk about all of Kant's stuff. We're just going to talk about phenomenon noumenon. So Kant introduces this idea that there's the world as we see it, and then there's the world as things are. And the world as things are is something that he believed that we simply did not have access to. This is idealism. This is a sort of big revolution here, where we have indirect realism being suddenly challenged into idealism, and it kicks off the whole idealist movement then. This idea is somewhat recurring, where people realize, well, I'm seeing things, but I don't have access to how they actually are. It's kind of interesting as well. Idealism is real easy to lead to skepticism because, yeah, that's like the point. All right, so with that, let's talk about the types of skepticism, I think, and then we'll talk about some fun people. So first off, there is skepticism about certain things. There's skepticism about knowledge. I want to say, if we take knowledge as justified true belief, that this holds within it skepticism about justification, but that's technically separate as well. There's also skepticism about truth, which is something that we didn't go over in class, however, is interesting nonetheless, and I think that might be the way that we sort of get into skepticism of knowledge. Then there's also skepticism of certainty. Basically, people think that we might be able to get knowledge, but we might not be able to get certain knowledge. We might not be able to be like, all right, we're 100% about this. So that's all fun. Then we have local skepticism. This would be skepticism about certain things. For example, someone could be a skeptic about ethics. They can say that there's no actual knowledge in ethics. There's no actual way about what's right or wrong. This is an approach that Nietzsche is going to take in a moment. There's also then, let's see. I was trying to apply local skepticism to epistemology, but that doesn't work out.
Yeah.
If you doubt all knowledge, then you become a global skeptic. So to attack knowledge itself, rather than knowledge in a certain field, makes one a global skeptic.
Which we probably won't be talking much about.
Yeah.
Because it's hard to get off the ground being a global skeptic. Because any question that you raise to a global skeptic, they can just reply with, well, I don't think we can have knowledge, so it's hard to raise ethics, moral stuff like that. It's very hard to figure out how someone like that would live without being 100% impulse driven, which is kind of a boring answer.
Yeah, it's weird. It's really weird to think about the global skeptical position, and to imagine that global skeptic writing more than 2 pages on what they think. This is something that Descartes runs into. Descartes spends a lot of time talking about all the things that he's going to doubt, and then he doubts them, and then he's like, all right, let's get out of it. Cartesian skepticism is probably the only example of global skepticism that we're going to interact with. It's more likely that we're going to sort of get this Socratic response of, I don't know, and then just moving along.
Yeah, what's your point?
But yeah, so those are the types. Notably, the local and global kind of work the categories aren't great for some of the philosophers. But let's start by talking about Wittgenstein, and then we'll go to Nietzsche and Camus. That makes sense, yeah. So, Wittgenstein, first of all, he wrote his Tractatus. In his Tractatus, he just solves all philosophy. He says there's sentences that make sense, and those are sentences that describe a picture of the world. And all other sentences are nonsense, including all philosophical propositions. Is a very radical approach, and it's why the early Wittgenstein is so influential. He then quit philosophy, became a school teacher, was very mean to the kids, reportedly, and then he ended up going back to Cambridge and taught at Cambridge. And he spent the rest of his life trying to deny the work that he made earlier, trying to find a way to overcome it. And many philosophers hold that he never did. I don't know. But he wrote one book called Uncertainty in his later life. And in this book, he challenges the idea of certainty. He says this is kind of ridiculous, whatever. And it looks like at the very beginning of the book, he's going to take this global skeptical approach. And that's something I was very excited for. And then he fucking switches it up. He's so skeptical that he's not willing to become, he's willing to be a skeptic about skepticism. To read a couple of passages here too. He says, can one say, where there is no doubt, there is no knowledge either? Doesn't one need grounds for doubt? Wherever I look, I find no grounds for doubting. Shit. So he's very fun. And he spends the entire book sort of going around like this. and this is why people like his earlier stuff. He's writing in a more aphoristic style, which is something that Nietzsche does as well. In this work, as opposed to Tractatus. Tractatus is very mathematical. So like there's proposition 1, and then there's 1.1 defending proposition 1, and then I don't think there's 1, I think it's 1. No, I think there is. Whatever. Then he has like 1.11 defending proposition 1.1. And he does this the entire book except for the last sentence in it. The last sentence he says is proposition 7, and he says, whereof we cannot speak, one must remain silent. And that's just really cool. That's the sort of nail in the coffin for all philosophy in his view. Or, well, not in his view, but in the interpretations of his view. He says that he wasn't really doing that. But it's just strange. So, he's maybe a local skeptic then. He believes what he's writing, so he's not a skeptic about truth, because to say anything is to sort of to counter being a skeptic about truth. Like to have assertive language simply just gets rid of the idea that one is a skeptic about truth, because there's a sort of assumption at the basis of language that says, I believe what I'm saying is true.
Would it be possible to live like that then, do you think? Kind of tying it back into it?
Yeah, if you're going to be a global skeptic or you're going to be a skeptic of truth, you either have to invent new language or you have to remain silent. Notably, this is sort of how Wittgenstein lived his life in a certain sense. For example, he believed that we had to demonstrate then things instead of talking about things. Mm-hmm. So, for example, he didn't believe in saying I love you. Because he was like, well, love is this idea that isn't contained in a picture. Mm-hmm. So it doesn't make sense to talk about it. And so we have all these accounts of him falling madly in love with people and never saying a word to them. It's sort of like a Kierkegaard's Diary of a Seducer, where it's like he sees someone like there's a line in a Diary of a Seducer where this person that they're madly in love with, whatever, mm-hmm. walks past and they ignore him, and the seducer is like, wow, it's so hot, and it's like yeah. It's just very silly. But Wittgenstein sort of lived this way though. I feel like
there's two ways we could probably go with that. Mm-hmm. It seems like, first off, it would be very much possible to live within society, I guess, mm-hmm. but it'd be extremely hard to interact with society. Yeah. So in a way, would that be would it be feasible? Because I guess the biggest problem that I have with skepticism, and we talked about this a little bit in class, mm-hmm. Is that it seems like even if you take the more basic, more just skeptical of absolute claims view, mm-hmm. Which I think is not that hard, and probably what a lot of our classmates even did at the end of the Can You Live with Skepticism debate. You come to a whole bunch of conclusions that seem very hard to integrate into a society that does not buy onto skepticism at all. And it seems hard to spread your ideas without completely deconstructing a person's worldview. Mm-hmm. So for simplicity's sake, we're going to take an specific example, animal rights. And we talked a little bit earlier about Descartes, about how he did terrible things to animals because mm-hmm. he thought that he was justified in doing so because of the Bible. And if you if you have some sort of skepticism, that seems abhorrent because you're like, well, animals obviously have the same rights as us. They have there's nothing that sets us apart from animals, really, if you think about it. So why would we be able to do anything we want to animals? So it seems in a world, especially our society, one dominated so heavily by moral Christians or moral Muslims, people who get their morality from a religion, is it possible to convince them of something that goes completely against their moral foundations without completely trying to deconstruct their worldview? Because that seems like an impossibility. And we've kind of done this with animals by just saying, oh, look, animals are cute, appealing to their emotions. Do you think it'd be even possible to go further than that?
Yeah. So there's a lot of good stuff in there. I feel like this is going to be a really good... Okay, when I get done talking about my stuff, we're going to talk about the death of God with Nietzsche, and this is going to be really fun. First of all, there's ethical skeptics, though. So there's skeptics that believe, well, there's no right or wrong way to act. So Descartes killing that dog is indifferent. The universe doesn't give a shit. The sun isn't crying, you know? I also want to talk about this postmodern point here. Foucault believes that society and power are inextricably linked. Society is something that sort of harbors power, whether it be societal institutions like government or school, or something like hospitals. And our knowledge, according to Foucault, pours out of these powerful institutions that claim to know what knowledge is. And to be skeptical of that knowledge then might cause one to end up being a hermit. You might have to live outside of society then.
Yeah, I feel like that might be the only way, unless... Because the other option you brought up, like the Earth and the Moon don't care about morality at all. That's completely counterintuitive to most people, and I think your emotions that are not only you're raised with about like seem almost intrinsic, if I can use that word, to humans. It goes against that heavily. To where even animals have some degree of sympathy, and it seems like it's a very important part of what makes a human. And if you have to connect those 2 points, where it's like, well, we have to be a skeptic about morality, but also I just have this emotional burning that's in my chest every single minute that I see like these horrific things going on. Either you have to live a completely ignorant life like a hermit or someone who just doesn't tune into those sort of things, or you have to fight this deep impulse within yourself. And I guess that kind of transitions to another question that's really difficult with skepticism, is that it's so intellectual. How possible is it to actually live it out in your life? Because I mean, I think we talked about Descartes and Hume, where they try living as a skeptic, and it's eventually like it's just too much for you to be like, oh, I don't know how to do this, or like I eventually just relax back into the way I was acting before, assuming we have morals and things like that.
I think this is going to be a really good time to get into these two then.
Okay.
So let's start with Nietzsche. First of all, the death of God. So you had this concern that you brought up at the beginning where it's like, well, okay, there we go.
Okay, we're good.
So you brought up this concern where, well, if people don't believe in Christianity, if they don't believe in some religion or whatever, where are they going to get morals from? And this is something that you hear, for example, a lot of Christians say about atheists and today too. Like there's a lot of people who are like, well, if you're an atheist, how do you have morals, whatever. Ultimately, this is going to be the Camusian project. Camus is going to Well, we'll talk about Camus when we talk about Camus.
Okay.
So first, the death of God. Nietzsche believed that God was simply irrelevant in society now. It didn't make sense really to believe in God anymore, which is wild. This is ultimately a reaction to Darwin to some degree. Basically, with Darwin coming about, it was now useless.
Which is crazy because I think, didn't he write most of his work in like 1800s Russia?
Germany.
Yeah.
So it's he became a professor in Germany when he was 24.
Mm-hmm.
And this is crazy also. Let's talk about this for just a second. People in the German tradition is there's only, at each university, there's only one professor in each discipline. And Nietzsche became that professor at the age of 24. And he stayed at, I can't remember what it was, some prestigious university, yada yada.
Well, I feel like that idea, if we could just tune off a little bit, that idea that, what do you think of the idea that religion is no longer needed in society to create morals? Or you can create a moral system without religion?
Well, he's not worried about the moral part of it. He's more worried about just the fact that it is irrelevant. And he's realizing there's a vast undermining that's happening. For example, he believes like science is completely undermined. The reason why is because he believes that, well, science inherently relies on God because God gives way for the idea of like knowledge, for example. Mm-hmm. It also gives way for the universe having a beautiful mechanism, whatever, that works, and that it has rules that we can learn then. With God going away, though, he realizes, and it's weird because science does it, science sort of kills itself. He sees it, and it's fun. But as for the idea of being an atheist and having morals, there's a lot of people in our society who will say that they're atheists, and they will say they have morals.
Yeah.
And I think they're typically, to some degree, wrong about their atheism. I don't think they understand what they're saying, and they don't take it far enough.
Right.
This is something where it gets a little bit more like intellectualized, and that's something I don't really like, but to sit and think about atheism radically as challenging a lot more things is really interesting.
Do you like, obviously the evolution from Nietzsche was, I think it's existentialism or absurdism?
Yeah, so existentialism poured out sort of from, well, he was a proto-existentialist. There was later thinkers that actually called themselves existentialists.
Yeah. But it's not this nihilistic idea.
Yeah.
It's an evolution upon that.
Oh, well, it's important to keep in mind, too, Nietzsche wasn't a nihilist as well. Nietzsche talked a lot about nihilism, but he saw himself as a warrior against nihilism. Mm-hmm. Yeah, so, but when you look at the existential project like Sartre or Heidegger, their sort of approaches are really interesting. My personal favorite, though, in the whole thing is absurdism from Camus. But yeah, okay. So let's continue talking about this then. So we hit this death of God then, what Nietzsche's really worried about. He thinks that eventually we don't know how early, he talks about this. Let's go to the Gay Science actually, real quick. There's this passage he has called The Madman. This is section 125. And it's this guy that comes in, and it's like daytime. He comes in with a lantern, and he's crying out, he's screaming, I seek God, I seek God. And everyone there is atheists. And everyone there is like, look at this guy's so silly, whatever. They're like, is he hiding? They're making fun of him, whatever. Mm-hmm. And then he screams this huge rant, whither is God? And then at the very end of it, he says, Here the madman fell silent and looked again at his listeners, and they too were silent and stared at him in astonishment. At last he threw his lantern on the ground, and it broke and went out. I come too early, he said. My time has not come yet. This tremendous event is still on its way, still wandering. It has not yet reached the ears of men. Lightning and thunder require time. The light of the stars requires time. Deeds require time, even after they are done, before they can be seen and heard. So Nietzsche isn't writing for his time.
Mm-hmm.
He's just seeing that this undermining is happening, and he thinks that it's going to eventually end up causing this huge catastrophe, this huge avalanche.
I think
it's so fun.
I think this is also a really interesting time because we can apply what he talked about, because the time is coming. Like, less and less people are becoming religious, and the problem is, and I don't know if I'm seeing edge cases, but there's also been a pretty heavy backlash against this as well. And a lot of people becoming a lot more extreme, like a rejection of materialism or skepticism in religion and stuff like this. And I was wondering, because it's possible, we know it's possible, people have done it, to subscribe to either absurdism or existentialism and build a happy life where you think you have morals, you realize you don't need God to have morals. That is possible, but it seems like an incredibly intellectual endeavor that most people are not able to do.
Sort of, I can see that. I've talked to... I go to this Bible study group, and I don't believe in God and Christ and stuff, but I still go to this. And there was one of the things that some of the people were talking to me about was one of the reasons they believe in God is because otherwise nothing would have any meaning. And this is something that Camus takes and sort of runs with. He says, well, there is no meaning. That's fine. We can still sort of...
create our own meaning?
Yeah. I worry about... It's hard to talk about Camus because he says that he is doing something completely different from Sartre. And I see Sartre's project as very much being we can create our own. So it's weird to talk about Camus then because I would like to think he's doing something different.
Right. Well, then I have a question.
Yeah.
So this is something that has been going through my head over and over again as we've gone through the class. It seems like there is an intrinsic human desire to get to have things mean things.
Yes.
I guess.
This is something that Camus talks about.
Yeah.
So Camus, let's talk about Camus now. We can come back to Nietzsche if there's anything we have to talk about with that. One thing, I'll write it down real quick. The perspectivalism. It's kind of interesting. Oh, also, okay, so let's just finish up Nietzsche real quick, actually.
Yeah.
First of all, he denies all ethics. Okay. Oh, right. Okay. Okay, so he denies all ethics, and then he also goes out and denies all metaphysics. He's like, metaphysics isn't real. Let's get rid of that. And then he has this weird view that's sort of like relativism, but it's not relativism. And he might be attacking knowledge here too, with his perspectivalism, but it's hard to say. Camus, though. Camus' project ultimately relies on three truths. The first is that people inherently desire meaning. The second is that the world has no meaning. These two things existing together, and this is the third truth, is absurd. If just one was the case, it's fine. If just the other was the case, it's fine. However, this becomes very difficult to try and deny one of them. For example, if you try to deny that the world has any meaning, you end up killing yourself, is something he might be saying.
We don't need to get it.
Yeah. If you deny then that
people desire meaning?
Yeah, if you deny that people desire meaning, then you end up if you deny that the world is meaningless, you end up committing what he calls philosophical suicide.
Right.
And this is something I see the existentialist as doing, and he writes extensively about that. He then goes out. Okay.
We'll finish up this thought.
Yeah,
It
okay.
doesn't have to be.
Yeah, it's fine. Okay, sweet.
Yeah.
So, Camus then, so he talks about this then, and he's like, okay, well, what are the conclusions that we can make from absurdism then? We have these three paths out of the absurd. There's suicide, philosophical suicide, and then what he calls absurdism.
Mm-hmm.
He explores then what absurdism is, so let's do that. Absurdism is based, again, on three fundamental truths. You can tell he's French. Get ready for this, right? He believes that we have to chase absurd freedom, absurd passion, and absurd revolt.
Okay.
Holy shit.
I could have figured out he was French from that. Right?
Yeah,
You didn't
exactly.
need to go there, right?
So absurd freedom is realizing the ridiculous freedom that we have, but also the ridiculous constraints on our freedom that we have.
Mm-hmm.
Both of which are incredibly interesting. Then we have absurd passion, which is sort of living life with value, sort of,
Mm-hmm.
of just going out and being enthusiastic about all of it. And then we have absurd revolt, which is sort of this desire to out-absurd the universe. So one of the arguments that, he doesn't make this, but a YouTuber talks about and makes this named Exerbia.
Mm-hmm.
Exerbia says that, well, this means, for example, doing the dishes, because dishes make no sense. This is something that it doesn't have any meaning.
Mm-hmm.
Or dyeing your dick blue. And both of these things are great ways to live, according to Camus and according to Exerbia.
Okay.
And then finally we have this idea of staring into the abyss, getting LASIK eye surgery, as he puts it, in order to stare so hard into the abyss that the abyss is uncomfortable. That is the goal of absurdism.
Okay,
Yeah.
We've gone over time. Let's
Yep.
just end with closing points.
Yep.
And then, so let's start off with you. What do you think? Is it possible to live as a skeptic?
I think it's possible, but you'd be sort of, again, relinquished to not being able to say anything. It'd be very difficult to have global skepticism. It's very easy to have local skepticism about ethics. I didn't even talk about the Nazis took this and did some things to it. If you want to talk about denying ethics, suddenly it becomes a lot harder in a world with the Nazis. And it's really hard to sort of transcend ethics in a way that is moral.
I mean, it's hard and it's going to be difficult, but once again, like, is that something we should actually work on doing? Is it an end that's valuable? Well, was that everything, or?
Yeah, one last thing. I think the skeptic and the conversation between the skeptic and the non-skeptic is sort of the conversation is what produces, in some sense, progress about knowledge. Like, it used to be that the madman was someone who was highly valued in society,
right?
Because they demonstrated where the limits of reason are. And I think that both the skeptic and the non-skeptic can look at the other and appreciate them for defining their boundaries. If that makes sense.
I think in an ideal world that would be great and possible, but it seems like if you subscribe to one or the other, you see the other as morally reprehensible, because either you're trying to draw away.
Unless you're more skeptic. I'm
that is true, actually. Well, you got me there.
Yeah. Well, yeah, I get what you're saying.
Yeah, the people who are not skeptics see the skeptics as drawing away from what is morally true and the objective moral truth of the world, and the skeptics see the non-skeptics, assuming that they're doing stuff that the non-skeptics see as morally reprehensible. It's like, you're doing this for absolutely no reason. You're Sky Daddy, and it's just frustrating.
Yeah.
And you see the outcomes can be very negative. Anyway, my closing thoughts real quick. I think I mostly agree with you. I think it is possible. It's pretty hard to be a global skeptic, but if you really wanted to go off and live as a hermit, go at it, man. Have fun out in those woods. But sadly, it seems increasingly less possible as society expands more and more every day, as population centers expand, stuff like that. And you're going to have to understand that society is one day going to come knocking on your door eventually, even if you try to hide. But local skepticism, possible if not difficult, unless you are a philosophy person and then you're so smart you can figure out a way around it. But I really like the idea of local skepticism, and it's probably even something we should encourage to people to get out of ideological roots. Okay, we've gone 5 minutes over. Thanks for listening. Hope you enjoyed it. And
have a good break, that.
Thanks for the fun class.
Yeah, absolutely. That was wonderful.